the weird and the wonderful with Strange Bones. That's me. So as we're getting started with today's live, as promised, we are going to be absolutely doing pirates. But I suppose we need to answer a few questions. One of which, of course, is what is a pirate? When in history were pirates a thing? What does pirate even mean? And of course, technically, pirates have existed for as long as you've had people on boats, really. As long as there's been boats, there's been pirates. But really and truly, I think you'll find that the golden age of there being pirates was a very specific time, and to a fair degree, a fairly specific place. It was the Caribbean, where the real legends of piracy developed. And I think that is truly where the main ones come from. But throughout history, we've had some pretty interesting ones that have been quite different through history. So we're going to do a deep dive into that, something to give us something to learn, something to talk about, because they weren't all quite what you might think. And with that, I'm going to remind everybody that on this channel we neither promote nor deride any of the things we look at. We look at it purely as a point of interest for us, something to learn, something to know, something to incite our imaginations. And with that said, I encourage you to give your opinions, as long as you're polite about it. Comment lots, like, they're free and the channel needs them. Share, subscribe, and do all of the good stuff to keep it all going, because it really does matter. And remember that we have but one rule on the channel, which is to say, don't be rude, because if you're rude, we will give you the boot. We've had far too many trolls. But nevertheless, you are all welcome to comment as much as you like. And indeed, we may even let some of you on to the live. Though we do have some rules about who we let on. We need to know who you are, so we know that you're not a troll. But that said, MB Fragger, welcome, welcome. Pirates, what are they? Why are they? How did it all come to pass? And what are the stories about these amazing things? Livu, welcome, welcome. So historically, well, when you talk pirates, I think it would be a fair statement to say that we automatically think of the days of the Caribbean and the famous ones that started up there. They were maritime raiders ranging across quite a collection of different types who terrorized trade routes, mostly around between the 1650s and 1730s on the Caribbean, especially preying on rich Spanish ships, because as we know, Spain had hit South America hard, and in South America there was a great deal of gold, which the locals didn't really put much value to. So of course the Spanish grabbed all they could and more, and everyone else grabbed it off the Spanish, because that's what you do, which is kind of unkind, I suppose, but nevertheless, they were very colourful figures in a lot of different ways. And besides the great male pirates, there were a number of pretty impressive female pirates who challenged gender norms. And some of them achieved huge successes as well. And some of them achieved some pretty gruesome ends. Now, we know that some pirates were not what you would think. They were state-sanctioned pirates, known as privateers, including people like Sir Francis Drake, who was even knighted, who attacked Spanish ships for England, earning fame and fortune. There were the North African pirates like the Barbarossa brothers, Arouge and Hizir, who dominated the Mediterranean, attacking European vessels for the Ottoman Empire. But the Golden Age was definitely in the Caribbean, where the famous ones that perhaps you may have heard of from childhood stories existed, people like Blackbeard and Morgan, Red Rackham, Black Bart, and of course even Chinese pirates like Qing Shi, who definitely controlled the China Sea. And they did it for a lot of reasons. Many pirates came from impoverished urban areas seeking quick riches and escape. Some were legal, but didn't stay that way when fortunes shifted, and some of them even operated in groups forming democratic structures and codes of conduct, even though their lives were often quite short and rather brutal. So they are colourful and famous figures, and we are going to look at all of that and what gold they may have got. Now, the word pirate comes from the Latin pirata, and the Latin pirata comes from the Greek pirates. And basically it means one who attempts, but in a very specific way, from the word pira. It came into English from the Old French to mean sea robbers, but the concept really means an attempt on a very risky venture. So the idea of risking all for great wealth, which certainly covers the meaning in a lot of ways, and included both legal and illegal attacks. And of course it's come into the modern age to even refer to digital theft. We talk of computer piracy. So it has expanded over the centuries. We also know that they are sometimes referred to as buccaneers, which is another word we shall look into. So a buccaneer comes from the French boucanier, which originally described hunters in the Caribbean who cured the meat that they hunted on a wooden frame called a boucan, derived from the Arawak or Tupi word bucan or mukem. These hunters, often French or English settlers in the Hispaniola, later turned to piracy, attacking Spanish ships, and the term stuck, evolving from meat curers, as it were, to sea rovers or brigands, which is quite interesting. Now, in the modern day, of course, a buccaneer refers to a pirate, very particularly the Pirates of the Caribbean. And interestingly enough, the movie was not too far wrong about how it all went. It's a very interesting sort of a story. So many of the things seen, and of course, while the movie Pirates of the Caribbean absolutely did have a great deal of fantasy in it. The legends, at least, of these fantasies were thought to be true at the time, which is very, very interesting. So the golden age of piracy was between the 1650s and the 1730s, when maritime piracy was a significant factor in the histories of the North Atlantic and Indian Oceans. The buccaneering period characterized by Anglo-French seamen based in Jamaica, Martinique and Tortuga, attacking the Spanish colonies and shipping on the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific to Western Pacific. The pirate rebound in the 1690s, associated with long-distance voyages from the varying Caribbean and North American ports to establish bases in countries like Madagascar, in order to rob Muslim and East India Company targets in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. Post-Spanish succession period from 1715 to 1730, when English sailors and privateers left unemployed by the end of the War of the Spanish Succession, turned en masse to piracy in the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and the North American Eastern Seaboard, and the West African coast. So when things changed, they changed targets, which of course makes a very big deal. Factors contributing to piracy in the Golden Age include the rise in quantities of valuable cargoes being shipped to Europe over vast ocean areas, reduced European navies in certain regions, the training and experience that many sailors had gained in European navies, especially the British Royal Navy, and the corrupt and ineffectual government in European overseas colonies. Colonial powers at the time constantly fought with pirates and engaged in several notable battles and other events. Now, the Golden Age, quite literally in many ways, so about 150 years of pirates, which is pretty damn cool, and gold was indeed the aim. So you had a varied selection, as it were, but piracy rose out of and mirrored on a similar scale conflicts over trade, colonization among rival European powers, empires of Britain, Spain, the Netherlands, Portugal, France, and most pirates in the era were English, Welsh, Dutch, Irish, and French in origin. Most interestingly, they came from poorer areas, and the best way to make money was to take it from the rich people. Now, we can kind of say that it really became a thing at the end of the wars of religion, when people stopped fighting around 1650 and started developing their colonial empires, which of course meant that there was more money. French buccaneers had established themselves on northern Hispaniola as early as 1625. And for those of you who are wondering, where is Hispaniola? So it's an island in the Greater Antilles of the Caribbean between Cuba and Puerto Rico. It's the most popular island in the West Indies and the second largest by land area after Cuba, covering an area of 76,192 square kilometers, which is pretty big and is now divided into two separate sovereignties. So a large island. They lived mostly as hunters initially, these French buccaneers, hunters of pigs and cattle, and only then after transitioned to piracy, motivated in part by Spanish efforts to wipe out both the buccaneers and the animals on which they depended. The buccaneers then migrated from Hispaniola's mainland to the more defensible offshore island of Tortuga, which of course pretty much in Pirates of the Caribbean, the movie, is Pirate Island. But it had limited resources and therefore increased their piratical raids, which is pretty cool. According to Alexandra Exquermelin, a buccaneer and historian from this period, the Tortuga buccaneer Pierre Legrand pioneered the settlers' attacks on galleons making return voyages to Spain. The French buccaneer Francois L'Olonais was known for his extreme and infamous cruelty towards Spanish prisoners on the island of Martinique, and served as a home port for French buccaneers like him, allowing the French to operate in the Caribbean against the Spanish. So there's a lot of politics involved in the forming of pirates and how they came to be. And I suppose it was one of those things that in the beginning they thought it would be a good idea to allow, as long as it was against the right things. So the growth of buccaneering on Tortuga was augmented by the British capture of Jamaica from Spain in 1655, and the early governors of Jamaica freely granted letters of marque to Tortuga buccaneers. So this helped the growth of Port Royal, and these raiders were thus given a far more profitable and enjoyable place to sell their booty, which was wanted. In the 1660s, the new French governor of Tortuga, Bertrand d'Ogeron, similarly provided privateering commissions to both his own colonists and to English cutthroats from Port Royal. These conditions brought Caribbean buccaneering to its absolute top, culminating in Henry Morgan's Panama expedition in 1670, which saw Panama City plundered, sacked, and burnt to the ground. The devastation brought by the buccaneers finally drove the Spanish crown to authorize privateering too, which they traditionally didn't allow much at all. But they needed to hunt down piracy and all the stuff stolen from them. And the Guardacosta was developed, which was quite important. So there were several political maneuverings around what some would say were pirates and some would say were privateers. And the difference was very important. And they slipped over the two sides on and off, and sometimes went from legal privateer to full-on pirate because, well, the government was simply not entirely honest themselves. Now, limitations eventually happened on piracy by and large when the Spanish main was simply exhausted, and there wasn't much left to steal, which sort of made piracy eventually die out as a thing in the Golden Age, though we do know that it goes on even today. We know that the famous piracies and the famous pirates, hey, Spooky, all happened as a result of, well, politics, really. And when the politics changed, it changed a lot of things.
And when the politics changed, it changed a lot of things.
How are you doing, Spooky?
Good evening. Good.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So we're just doing the intro to piracy and what it is and when it was and why. So while piracy has happened as long as you've had ships on the sea, and still continues today, we do know that there was a golden age where most of the stories of pirates come from. And many of the stories are true. But nevertheless, now I assume that you have watched Pirates of the Caribbean?
That's a very fun video or series.
It is, and while it does have a number of sort of, well, we're going to call them fantasy bits to them, a lot of the story is actually pretty accurate as to how it went. And on top of that, while those stories might not really be true, they were believed in many ways by a lot of people. Pirates, and indeed sailors in general, are a terribly superstitious lot. So there are a lot of things. So, for example, you could never have a woman on board a ship. That was very bad luck indeed, which of course was a very important thing when it comes to people like Mary Read and Anne Bonny. But nevertheless, things happened, and of course the politics affected it, with the difference between privateers and pirates. And while on the receiving end the difference was probably fairly academic, it did mean that certain people were allowed to do pirating. Now, the next interesting question before we get into individual pirates is, well, what sort of weapons did they carry? Because that sounds pretty damn cool too. And at least in the Golden Age, so 1600s and on to about the 1730s, we are looking at flintlock pistols, not the greatest firearm around, slow firing and difficult to use and prone to damp, which meant that for them to be any use, you needed to carry several, because they were one shot, and in battle you didn't have much reload time, especially not on a boat in close quarters. So flintlock pistols, muskets, which are basically a flintlock rifle, blunderbusses, which were popular because they could shoot virtually anything. You could jam down a barrel, but they sprayed a lot, which meant not always that good on the close quarters of a ship. And then, of course, melee weapons like cutlasses, daggers, boarding axes, and pikes. Then, of course, you would have the ship-mounted cannons that fired three kinds of shot, which were very, very interesting. You had solid shot, which was basically a big iron ball, grape shot, which was kind of like a shotgun, so lots of little things jammed in together that then flew out, and a very nasty weapon called chain shot. Now, chain shot were two smaller iron balls that were connected. We've achieved our live success. Way, thank you so much for Karina. And I do hope you get to stay on for a little bit as well, because we're talking pirates and it's cool. So thank you to Karina and welcome to Karina. Now, chain shot. So, two small iron balls with chain between. And while they were truly awful is because they would spin in flight. And the aim was twofold. You would fire it at a mast because it would wrap round the mast and break it off. And of course, a ship with no mast can't go. The second method of using it was clearing the decks. Now, if you can knock a mast down with chain shot, you can imagine what it will do to the legs of everybody it hits. Not pleasant. Not pleasant at all. So, fairly gruesome. Yeah, I'm awesome. I like being awesome. Now, the most famous thing that as a kid, for me at least, and I'm sure all of you, we connect to pirates was the cutlass. And the reason the cutlass was so popular is that it was short, strong, slightly curved, and fairly heavy. So it was good for fighting in tight spaces, could be used to chop ropes and all kinds of things. It was a great tool, but it was very effective for both slicing and stabbing. Now, along with that, you would have your dagger or dirk, useful and concealable for a last-ditch attack. Your boarding axe, which was a general tool, not just for combat. It worked very well in combat, but you could use it for cutting ropes, rigging, cutting wood in order to make new stuff for the boat in case it got damaged and all the things like that. So very important as an act. And then pikes were used because they were long, and the sole but very important use was you could keep the enemies from getting onto the boat. Now, I remember reading a very interesting account. I don't know if it's true, but in stories you would see the pirates swinging on ropes across between the ships with their cutlass held between their teeth. And in one comment it was said this never really happened, or at least never happened more than once. And the reason was, if you've ever seen a boiled egg having the top cut off, similar thing. So yeah, not a good idea there. Now, other things that were used, you had things called granados and stink pots. Now, a granados was quite literally a canvas bag stuffed with nails and black powder, sealed inside an iron ball with a wick. So a very, very primitive and early variety of hand grenade. And then a stink pot was basically a thing that made a huge amount of choking smoke that would either blind you or make you throw up, and was useful for incapacitating people in case you didn't want to slaughter everyone. And not everybody did. But probably one of the greatest weapons they used was, in fact, the Jolly Roger, the pirate's flag, because when you saw it, it was probably better to surrender, and it often worked. So let's take a brief look at the pirate flag. So what were the flags like? So known as the Jolly Roger, they actually had very important meanings, and generally were not a skull and crossbones. Interesting fact. So they included skulls, bones, yes. Some were a skull and crossbones. Hourglasses to tell you your time was running out. Hearts, devils, and other things to intimidate victims. Now, a black flag meant that mercy was offered. If you didn't fight, they wouldn't slaughter you all. A red flag told you that there was going to be no mercy, and it would be a fight to the death. So the initial flags were not a skull and crossbones, though that kind of did become a thing. after a while. So the colour mattered. Some, in fact, were white flags with black symbols or other colours. And this was very important. The skull and crossbones later on in pirate history became the one to use, but initially not so much. So bleeding hearts and daggers, representing life, death and vengeance. Bones and skeletons were popular, along with devils, to say that they really meant what they were doing. And generally, each flag was a personal warning, so every captain had their own design. They were raised at last minute as a warning when close to a target ship. So they were there to tell you off. So, for example, Emmanuel Wynne did have a skull and crossbones, but with an hourglass. Edward England had the classic skull and crossbones, but Blackbeard, one of the most famous pirates ever, had a devil, a skeleton, and an hourglass. Now, the Jolly Roger, why is it called a Jolly Roger? Well, it comes from the Joli Rouge, the pretty red. So it basically meant that when you saw the red, you were largely screwed. So that was the sort of thing there. Now, of course, different cultures, different countries, different places, you've got different flags. But that was the importance of the Jolly Roger. And it did really work. People were terrified of such things simply because you saw it. There's not a lot of running away. And one of the things you do need to realize, even in the modern day, boats don't turn very easily. And back in the day, you relied entirely on the wind, which, of course, blew when it blew. So if it wasn't blowing too good, you were a bit screwed. And there's not a lot you can do. So naval warfare was a terribly difficult thing that it didn't work terribly well. Now, there are not very many Jolly Rogers left that have survived. In 1780, they captured one. Well, the Royal Navy did, and it's on display at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth, and is a red skull and crossbones. There are actually only 2 authentic Jolly Roger flags left in existence, so pretty cool to actually get one or see it. So the portraiture of death would definitely scare you. So there's some excellent descriptions of them that were kept, and they were known to be something you had to be afraid of. So violence and death is what it meant. Now, who were the big lads? Of course, one which you probably ought to know, if you're into pirates at all, was Sir Henry Morgan, who 1635 to 1688, he was a famous Welsh privateer, not a pirate. Very, very important distinction, because he only raided Spanish ships. He was a Welshman, a plantation owner, and later on he became the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, renowned for his very successful attacks on Spanish ports and ships in the Caribbean, often very, very brutal, and he amassed a huge amount of wealth and transitioned from buccaneer into a very respected colonial official. He led significant expeditions, most importantly the sack of Panama, becoming a legendary figure who blurred the lines rather a lot between legitimate commissioned attacker and full-on pirate. So he was quite a boykie, old Henry Morgan, with his fancy moustache and long curly hair, which I am led to understand was bright red. He was an interesting fellow in that regard. Now, he was a very, very real man, and we have his name even today on one of our favorite brands of spiced rum. So Captain Morgan's spiced rum is named after Sir Henry Morgan. He was a pirate in a way, a privateer for sure, a politician, born in 1635 in Llanrimi, a village between Cardiff and Newport in South Wales, to a prosperous farming family. He spent his childhood in Wales, but we're not really sure how he got from Wales to the West Indies. He was quite possibly kidnapped, essentially, what they used to call Barbadosed. So they needed workers in Barbados, and when they didn't have enough people there, they would simply basically run along and say, oh, there's a strong-looking lad, we'll take him, and they would kidnap you and sent to work as an indentured servant in Barbados. Is this true? Well, this version is the one that was suggested by Alexandra Exquemelin, who was Morgan's surgeon in Panama. In his writings, which later on were translated into English, the unparalleled exploits of Sir Henry Morgan, our English-Jamaican hero. Now, when Morgan heard of these publications, he sued Exquemelin, and he was forced to retract his version. But we don't know if that it was true or not true, because it does say a lot of bad things that Morgan did. So maybe that was the main reason. We do know that it's possible that in 1654, Henry joined Cromwell's troops under General Venables in Portsmouth and was sent to the Caribbean to attack the Spanish as part of what they did. We know that he arrived in Barbados in 1655 as a junior officer in Cromwell's forces. So whether he was there and joined or joined and went there, I suppose it matters not. There was an unsuccessful attack on Santo Domingo before they managed to actually take Jamaica, which was then largely underdeveloped but strategically very important as an island with a large natural harbour. So an important thing. Life on Jamaica, though, was rough. Lots of yellow fever, attacks on the British by the Maroons, who were runaway slaves. But Morgan did all right for himself, and after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, Henry's uncle, Edward, was appointed the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, and Henry married his uncle's daughter, yes, his cousin, Mary Elizabeth Morgan, in 1665. Now, he got his first command as a captain of a privateer ship, so a sanctioned ship which then, in 1662, was involved in an attack on Santiago de Cuba. A privateer was empowered by the British government, so not a pirate. They were supposed to attack and raid the Spanish on England's behalf. And the rule was that they weren't paid, but they could keep the plunder. This turned on them later on, as you will see in the case of certain others. But of course, he was pretty good at this. He was already wealthy with sugar plantations on Jamaica, and he was a man of status. And his fame literally became even more after a successful attack on Puerto Bello in Panama in 1666, when he took the entire town, held the residents to ransom, and then beat off a force of 3,000 Spanish soldiers and returned with an enormous amount of booty. So he made a lot of money. He was then made a colonel of Port Royal and elected admiral by his fellow privateers. The king of the privateers appointed commander-in-chief of all Jamaican forces in 1669, and by the time you got to 1670, he had 36 ships and 1,800 men under his command, which was a huge number. So he started getting pretty clever about this. In 1671, he attacked Panama City, the capital city of Spanish America, reputed to be one of the wealthiest cities in the world at the time, but heavily outnumbering everybody. But his reputation preceded him. The defenders fled, the city fell, and he burnt it to the ground. But unfortunately, all the gold and silver had been moved to safety before he attacked. To make it worse, it appeared a treaty had been signed between England and Spain, and the attack on Panama had taken place during a time of peace. Now, as we know, word traveled very, very slowly. So he didn't know at the time. So to appease the Spanish, in order to arrest Morgan, was sent to the governor of Jamaica, who was very reluctant to arrest his island's most famous resident. But Morgan was transported to London under arrest, where he remained a prisoner of state and charged with piracy. So even though he was a legal privateer, things could turn pretty fast. But without their leader, the privateers were reluctant to engage the enemy, and now England was at war again with Holland, and they realized that there was a huge risk to the sugar trade. So King Charles II enlisted the help of Captain Morgan, and he was knighted as I'm really sorry that we put you in jail, and sent back, where he lived the rest of his life in Port Royal, known as the capital of piracy. He absolutely did very, very well. And we're not really sure what actually killed him. We do know that he was very fond of his rum, and at the age of 53 he died in 1688. And some say he died of tuberculosis, but others say it was alcoholism. But he was a hugely wealthy man with 109 slaves that he owned. So thanks to Exquemelin, who was his biographer, his fame lives on, and we get a really good kind of spiced rum, which is pretty cool. So an important figure in piracy, but he was by far not the only colourful fellow. Another one was a chap by the name of Black Bart, or if you prefer, Bartholomew Roberts. Now, he was born in 1682 and passed on in 1722. He was born John Roberts. He was a Welsh pirate, again, measured by vessels captured. He was the most successful pirate of the golden age of piracy, and during his career he took over 400 prized ships, so pretty good. He raided ships off the Americas and the West African coast. He is noted for creating his own pirate code and adopting a very early variant of the skull and crossbones. So it's up to him that really started the trend. He became known as Black Bart, Bartdu in Welsh. But that was after his lifetime, and it made him hugely popular for both fiction and non-fiction, and he has definitely remained in some of the great pirate stories because of that. Black Bart, the Dread Roberts. He started his life as John Roberts, and it's not entirely sure why he changed his name from John to Bartholomew, but pirates did adopt aliases to hide their names or become more famous. He might have wanted to remind people of the already well-known buccaneer Bartholomew Sharp, and he's thought to have gone to sea when he was 13 years old, but we don't really know much about what happened until he was made mate of the Barbados sloop in 1718. In 1719, he was the second mate on a slave ship, the Princess, which is an ironic name for a slave ship, under Captain Abraham Plum. In early June that year, the Princess was anchored in Anamabu, which is on the Gold Coast of West Africa in what is present-day Ghana, and she was captured by pirates. The pirates were in the Royal Rover and the Royal James, led by Howell Davis. Now, Davis, like Roberts, was Welsh, and it seems that they liked the idea of the boat and crew and made them join the pirates. Davis quickly discovered that Roberts was a pretty good navigator, which was very important. And while he was reluctant at first to being a pirate, he came to see the advantages of being one and saw it as an opportunity. And he is quoted as saying, "In an honest service, there is thin commons, low wages, and hard labour. In this, plenty and satiety, pleasure and ease, liberty and power. And who would not balance creditor on this side, when all the hazard that is run for it, at worst, is only a sour look or two, at choking? No, a merry life and a short one shall be my motto." And so he became a pirate. So in the Navy, he earned £4 a month, which would be about £800 in 2023. So really not a lot, and he had no chance of much promotion. A few weeks after Roberts' capture, the Royal James had to be abandoned because of worm damage. The ships were all wood, remember, very important point. The Royal Rover headed for the island of Principe. He hoisted the flags of a British man-of-war and was allowed to enter the harbour, and even invited the governor to lunch on board his ship, actually intending to hold him hostage for ransom. Davis had to send boats to collect the governor, and he was invited to call at the fort for a glass of wine first. Unfortunately, the Portuguese knew who he was, and they ambushed Davis' party, and they shot Davis dead. The new captain had to be elected then, so the crew was divided into lords and commons, and it was the lords who had the right to propose a name to the remainder of the crew. Within 6 weeks of his capture, Roberts was made captain. Very unusual. But he was elected probably because he was able to navigate, and that was a massively important thing. And because of his personality, which was outspoken and opinionated, and he accepted the honor. So he may as well do it as a commander if he was to be a pirate. And his first act as captain was to go back to Principe and avenge the death of Captain Davis. They landed on the island in the darkness of night, killed most of the male population on the island, stole all items of value that they could carry away. Soon afterwards, he captured a Dutch Guineaman, which is the kind of ship, and then 2 days later, a British ship called the Experiment. The pirate ship took on water and provisions at Anambo, where a vote was taken whether the next voyage should be to the East Indies or to Brazil, and they chose Brazil. Now, through a combination of bravery and success that marked this adventure, he basically gained the loyalty of everybody. They concluded he was pistol-proof, and that they had much to gain by staying under his command. So it turns out that they did very, very, very well. They went around the Atlantic. They would stop off on uninhabited islands to water and top off their supplies. And at a point on the Brazilian coast, they had found no ships and were about to head to the West Indies when they encountered a fleet of 42 Portuguese ships in the Todos os Santos Bay, waiting for 2 men of war of guns, 70 guns, to escort them to Lisbon. Now, because they hadn't got their protection, Roberts took one of their vessels and ordered her master to point out the richest ship in the fleet, which was the Sagrada Familia, a ship with 40 guns and a crew of 170. They boarded and captured it, and on it were 40,000 gold moidores and jewelry destined at least for the King of Portugal, including a cross set with diamonds. They took the lot and the guns, which obviously would have been very hard to get your hands on for the most part. So it made him even more powerful. They then headed off to Devil's Island off the coast of Guyana to spend their booty, and then from there for the river Suriname, where they captured a sloop, another kind of ship, and then a brigantine. It took 40 men to pursue it, leaving somebody in charge of their main ship, and took the sloop because the sloop was faster. But it came windbound for 8 days, and when they finally returned to the ship, they discovered that Kennedy had buggered off with all the money. So they said, really? So they decided now that they would start things up properly. And it was at this point that Roberts created what is now known as a pirate code, and they swore on the Bible to uphold it. In the late February of 1720, they were joined by the French pirate Montigny La Palisse in another sloop, the Sea King, and the inhabitants of Barbados equipped 2 well-armed ships, the Somerset and the Philippa, to try and wipe them out. But they encountered the 2 pirate sloops, and the Fortune broke off engagement, sustaining considerable damage, but escaped. But the Sea King fled. Roberts had to Dominica to repair the sloop with 20 of his crew dying of wounds during the voyage, which shows that medicine was not a good thing at the time. They were being hunted down by varying boats from Martinique, and Roberts was now really upset. So he swore vengeance against the inhabitants of Barbados and Martinique, and he had a new flag made with a drawing of himself holding a flaming sword and standing on two skulls, one labelled ABH, a Barbadian's head, and the other AMH, a Martinican's head. Apparently, we do know that they captured a lot of ships around the place and basically built up wealth and weaponry. We know that on the 21st of June, sailing with black flags into the harbour of Trepani, basically they found 22 merchant ships and 150 fishing ships, and they just went all in. Many abandoned their ships in panic and fled, and the pirates just took all the ships and the whole island. Thank you very much. No real resistance offered, but he was angered by the cowardice of the captains who fled their ships, and every morning he had a gun fired, and the captains were forced to attend Roberts on his ship. They were told that anyone who was absent would have his ship burnt. They took over a number of the ships and fitted them with guns and things. They captured more and more and more ships, fitting them out with more cannons, which basically meant he built himself up an army. Now, this worked for him. They made huge amounts of money off taking ships over and over and over again, catching ships by the tens, which is pretty impressive for wooden ships at the time. And as a result, they sent specifics out to try and stop him, which did not work. He was very, very good as a captain and as a pirate. And it went on to a point where by 1721, trade in the West Indies was brought to a standstill over the sea. It just stopped. He was that powerful. He then took himself off to Africa and did exactly the same. But of course, it doesn't all go well for a pirate. And we know that in 1722, Chaloner Ogle of the HMS Swallow came across the pirate ships, and as they did so, they had to veer suddenly to avoid a shoal, which is basically an underwater reef that would have foundered the ship. And the pirates thought, oh, she's a fleeing merchant ship, and went straight after him. But Ogle, of course, was well armed and turned open her gun ports and fired. We know that 10 pirates were killed in the first salvo, and Skyme had his leg taken off by a cannonball, but he refused to leave the deck. But eventually they were beaten, and the Royal Fortune, the favourite ship of Roberts, was taken. Now, Roberts did not like this, but nevertheless, it meant that the attackers realized who they were after. Now, Roberts turned up at the engagement that followed as dressed in rich crimson damask, a red feather in his hat, and a gold chain around his neck with a diamond cross on it, sword in hand, and 2 pairs of pistols on his shoulders. They basically intended to sail past the attacking ship, and that would mean that they would have a good chance to escape, but would have to take 1 broadside. But unfortunately, they didn't do it right, and the ship attacking them managed a 2nd broadside. Now, Roberts was killed by grape shot, which struck him in the throat as he stood on the deck, and before the body could be captured, though, his crew, because that's what Roberts wanted, quickly weighted his body and flung it overboard so that they could never capture his body, and it has never ever been found. And so ended one of the greatest pirates that really did cause absolute hell in the Caribbean. Those who didn't die on the voyage back, of all of the pirates that were captured, we know that 54 were condemned to death, of which 52 were hung. 2 were reprieved. Another 20 were allowed to sign indentures with the Royal African Company, so they exchanged immediate death for a very lingering one, working in a very hard life. 17 were sent to the Marshalsea prison in London for trial, and some did get off, but by and large, they ended their careers one way or another. Of course, Captain Ogle got a knighthood, the only British officer to be honoured specifically for his actions against pirates. He also profited a hell of a lot, because he took the gold that robbers had and he kept it. And eventually he became an admiral. So he did well out of it, and he got the gold. And Roberts was killed. And that was the end of Roberts. And they say that his death marked the end of true piracy off the coast of Africa. The turning point in the slave trade, and even in the larger history of capitalism. But what was his code, before we move on to another fellow? And then we are going to see what questions you might have. So, every man has a vote in the affairs of moment, has equal title to the fresh provisions or strong liquors at any time seized, and may use them at his pleasure, unless scarcity makes it necessary for the good of all to vote a retrenchment. Every man shall be called fairly in turn by list on board of prize, because, over and above their proper share, they were on these occasions allowed a shift of clothes. But if they defrauded the company to the value of $1 in plate, jewels, or money, marooning is the punishment. And we know there are famous pirates that were marooned. And of course, if you've read Treasure Island, the guy that was there marooned on the island was based on a real person. And we will get to him in due course. If the robbery was only betwixt one another, they contented themselves with slitting the ears and nose of the guilty and set him on shore, not in an uninhabitable place, but where he was sure to encounter hardships. No person to game at cards or dice for money. The lights and candles to be put out at 8 o'clock every night, and if any of the crew after that hour still remained inclined for drinking, they were to do it on the open deck. Their piece, pistols, and cutlass are to be kept clean and fit for service. No boy or woman to be allowed amongst them. if any man were to be found seducing any of the latter sex and carried her to sea disguised, he would suffer death. To desert the ship or their quarters in battle, punishment by death or marooning. No striking one another on board, but every man's quarrels to be ended on shore at sword and pistol. No man to talk of breaking up their way of living till each has shared 1,000 pounds. In order to do this, any man should lose a limb or become the cripple in their service. He is to have $800 from public stock, and for lesser hurts proportionately. The captain and quartermaster to receive 2 shares of a prize, the master, boatswain, and gunner 1 share and a half, and other officers 1 1/4. Musicians to have rest on the Sabbath day, but the other 6 days and nights none without special favour. And if you followed all of these rules, you could be a pirate. That's pretty cool. So, yeah, there we go, the black flag of Roberts. So what do you think thus far? Do you have questions? I know you said you had quite a few questions in the last live, Spooky.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember those questions.
You've really got to learn to write them down. Yeah. But ask, whatever.
Do you think the curses of the seas?
Well,
I'm not sure if you watched that movie.
one thing I will tell you is whether or not the curses really existed, real pirates definitely believed in them. And the stories of Davy Jones's locker and all of that were absolutely believed. Pirates, according to record, were a terribly superstitious lot. And they absolutely did believe in all kinds of things, which really does matter. So, yes, in a sense, they were all true because they were so well believed by pirates that they lived their lives around them. So absolutely, there was that.
Do you think mermaids are a curse?
Well, I suppose it depends on how long you've been at sea and whether or not they drown you. I personally do not think that they would be a curse, but there were plenty of other curses as a result of things. And one of the reasons why you never brought a woman on board was because it was incredibly bad luck. It was considered incredibly bad luck to strike a crew member while on board. That's why you had to solve your problems on shore. There were all kinds of different things that were bad luck. So, yeah, you have to be pretty careful. And given that you're dealing about people on a wooden ship that was quite small, actually, they were not terribly big ships, really, and your medical availability of things was really slim. There are stories of genuine doctors looking through what was in the medicine chest, and people were just assigned the job of being ship's doctor because, you know, someone's got to be it. And they would find vials of bat guano and God knows what else that were given out in an attempt. So if you got injured, given that you were months and months away from any kind of medical help, there was a pretty good chance you would die. I mean, it was a rough life. Many of them had no idea about scurvy and how to deal with it. They just knew that you could get it, and if you got it, you would probably die. The chance to get fresh food depended massively on whether or not you could moor the ship somewhere safe, which meant uninhabited islands were very important to them. And the fact that Tortuga, quite literally, just as in the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, became known as the capital of pirates, even before Port Royal did, was a major, major deal, because it was a place you could go and sell your loot. It's all very well to have thousands of pounds in gold, but if you can't use it, is not much good. So these things made a big deal. So there were absolutely all kinds of legendary curses and more. And the curse of ghost ships and stuff like that, absolutely, that was rife. Was it real? Well, I mean, I suppose that's up to your belief in ghosts. But they believed, and that mattered.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason why I asked that question about mermaids was because in Pirates of the Caribbean there was mermaids, but also they ended all the curses, and now we don't see any mermaids.
Well, that was kind of a fictionalized bit, and I didn't find anything in the actual research I did that told of something like that. I don't think it was a belief of the time, but there were claims of people who said they saw mermaids. They were absolutely feared by sailors because they would drag you to your death. But who's to say? Part of the biggest scares were not mermaids so much as the local voodoo queens and similar that could curse you. That was absolutely terrifying.
So eating on your ship as a pirate, you need to gain a lot of stock
Yes,
before you ship off.
yes,
Unless you can fish all day, well, because you'll probably be on. Well, if you're a raider and you're gonna raid a place, then you'll probably be on the ocean for a few weeks to
months,
reach your destination.
months to years.
Yeah, the kind of ships they've had also was probably very. Yeah, they had
Well,
slow ships. They didn't have steam engine ships or
correct.
big oil ships. Yeah.
So on a ship, what they would have, and this is why many of them were called buccaneers, from the bukan, which was a rack used for drying meat by early hunters, which pirates absolutely did do. So dried meat was common. Hardtack, basically a hard ship's biscuit, which was not very good at all, but that was one of the provisions. So fresh fruits and vegetables were a big deal. And the ability to stop off an island to get fresh water and fresh fruit was a very, very big deal. And that's why they had specific places where that would be their hideout spot. Not really to hide out so much as a place that they could go, get off the ship and get fresh fruit and water. Because without it, you'd die. So yes, it was a big deal. And you were permitted a measure of rum, along with your water, which was also important because you never really knew if the fresh water you got didn't have varying pathogens and stuff in, or developed them because you'd been on for weeks on board ship with barrels of water. So the rum often was a good way to protect you from getting violently ill.
So, do you know, pirates wouldn't exist if there was no type of currency,
Yes.
because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for money, for gold,
Yes.
something they can trade with.
And of course, the famous ones are the doubloons.
Yeah. But how hard must life have been if you always had to go and look for food, try and hunt a small animal, or dig a hole, see if you can find some roots to eat?
Well, pretty harsh. And it is exactly for that reason that many turn to piracy. Because if I can nick all of your gold, I can then go and buy the food and stuff that I need. So that was very much part of the reason, because when people started taking over the colonies, the government started taking over the colonies, they then didn't want the hunters there anymore, and they basically wiped out access to the things that the hunters hunted, which meant they couldn't make a living. So the buccaneers stopped being hunters for meat and stuff and turned to hunting merchants for gold to replace the job that now they didn't have. So the beginnings of piracy kind of was the fault of the government.
Well, you had small little governments back then, just kings or leaders.
No, you had quite big ones. In the 16th and 17th centuries, they were fairly large. But remember that the governments in question you're talking about are all the way back in Europe. So the local government was small and not that great until the main government sent more people. And of course, on the open sea, it's hard to follow and figure out where the person you're trying to hunt is, which is hard for the pirates on the one side, but really useful for the pirates when they're being hunted. And
Can
they
you
knew
maybe
the
tell me
seas.
more about scurvy?
Scurvy,
What is
okay. So ultimately, scurvy is not a disease. Scurvy is vitamin C deficiency. But what makes it
Okay.
really important is that if you don't have vitamin C in your body stops making collagen. Collagen is quite literally the glue that makes you stick together. Okay?
Okay.
It's what now, your body does not retain vitamin C, which means you have to keep eating it quite often. Maybe not daily, but certainly every week. If you don't, the collagen in your body starts coming apart. Now, we know that now scientifically, but imagine you get what you think is a disease that causes even old wounds, in other words, scar tissue where the skin is weaker than the rest of the body, to spring open. That you literally suddenly find your teeth falling out, your gums bleeding, and you start bleeding to death. It's fairly terrifying, like a curse. Hey, Adrian.
Hey, how are you?
Good, good, good. So we're talking pirates. So,
So regarding scurvy, yeah, but I asked
yes.
that question because I was reading here a couple of things, and yeah, so they did had to eat roots, vegetables, to combat scurvy, and that's why I asked you what, because I wasn't sure what scurvy was.
Well, essentially, what you really wanted, and this is where the Portuguese did it right. Before, you know how the British are known as limeys? It's a nickname for the British. They're called limeys because the British Navy discovered that you could grow a small lime tree on board the boat, and they would use limes to combat scurvy. Now, the Portuguese, before the British did limes, discovered that there was a particular fruit in South America which worked even better. And so they took it home, and on the way, they grew it on the island of Madeira. And when Vasco da Gama came down and around to do the whole African thing that we know from history, he stopped on the island of Madeira and loaded up not only with a whole lot of this fruit, but a couple of the trees, and he planted them at Port Natal, which he named because he found it on Christmas Day. Port Christmas, basically, which now we know is Durban. And that fruit was the guava. So guavas are not natural to South Africa or Africa at all. They come from South America, and they were brought here specifically by Vasco, who got them from Madeira, where they were brought by the Portuguese.
Okay.
So people came up with ideas on how to get around using things that would combat this terrible curse, because it was seen as a curse. And of course, medicine at the time was pretty dodgy, and people believed that magic was involved and devil's curses and all the rest of it. So it was really important to get fresh fruit. And when you're in the Caribbean, that largely meant mangoes and guavas. That was how they combated scurvy. Now, of course, nowadays, we know that your body is able to convert ascorbic acid into vitamin C. And ascorbic acid can be kept in pill form. So you can take a giant bottle of pills and you're fine. You won't get scurvy. They did not know that.
Yeah. Well, now they know. Well, today's pirates are probably a lot more intelligent, and they're secured, and there's probably trading places all over the place now.
I would say many of the modern pirates, in many ways,
And they've got tin food and all sorts of things.
they're more privateers than pirates, because many of the so-called pirates, they're seen as pirates by their victims, but they're often, at least unofficially, sanctioned by certain places where they can then go and sell off what they've got.
Well, if you look at the US privateers, they come full throttle with armored ships and helicopters, and there's no escape.
Absolutely. So
you can't shoot them with a rifle. They're gonna bomb you.
Yeah, so certain things haven't changed all that much. The equipment might have, but the methodology remains the same.
No, but you do get normal pirates that just does it to loot or to kill. They come to harm you because they know that nobody's going to come and help you, so they've got you trapped.
That's the advantage of the
They're
ocean.
on fast boats, and you are probably on a very slow boat.
Well, it's not just the speed alone. It's also the absolute certainty in many ways that nobody's coming to help you for a long time. It would take
Uh,
hours to be
but
able to get out, even with today's planes and. So they know
if
that if
you
they can
could
get on,
get a signal out,
even if you do, the sea is so huge and open. I get on, I grab everything that I want, kill anyone that stands in the way, do it fast and get gone. And
well,
by the time anyone turns up, they're not going to know where you are or, you know.
no, you're long gone.
So it's a very interesting situation. And we see these are the tactics that were used even way back. So, for example, one of the first female pirates who was actually Chinese, Shi Yang, also known as Zheng Shishao, and other names. She was a Chinese pirate leader that worked in the South China Sea from 1801 to 1810. She was born in 1775 and she became a pirate at the age of 26 in 1801. And apparently she was one of what was possibly the most terrifying pirates ever in that area. Hugely successful and terribly violent. We know that she married a pirate. So she was known as Zheng Shishao, or the wife of Zheng Yi, in Cantonese. But in 1807, when he died, she took control of his entire pirate confederation with the support of their son. And things just went crazy. She had 400 ships and between 40,000 and 70,000 pirates. She engaged in conflict with several major powers, including the British, the Portuguese, and the Chinese government, main government, the Great Qing regime. She negotiated surrender in 1810 to the Chinese authorities that allowed her to keep 24 ships and over 1,400 pirates and avoid prosecution. And she died in 1844 at the age of about 68, having lived a pretty prosperous life after her time of piracy. And it's a testimony that she negotiated to keep those ships and pirates and more and wealth from the very people she had raided the hell out of, to say that she really was that powerful. And they kind of didn't have much choice, because she was a solid gold bitch and everybody was terrified of her. She had the second biggest fleet in the Black Flag fleet of pirates, and eventually basically took over the entire pirate confederation, which was really quite terrifying. I mean, we're talking about a time where there weren't that many people that ever went on ships. So if you've got 40,000, you dominate. You literally dominate everybody. So, I mean, she took over, sorted everybody out, took all their money, and then negotiated a quiet life when she was too old to carry on fighting. And it was really quite impressive. She fought the British, she fought the Portuguese, she fought the Chinese, and basically said screw you to everybody. And yeah, it was terrifying. And eventually died in Macau, old and happy and full of beans, because what were they going to do?
Yeah. So I just learned something new
Tell me.
recently. It's a different subject, but I jumped off the subject when I was thinking about food on what they would eat
Okay.
and how hard it was for people to
To get
actually
food.
eat back in the day. Not
Yes.
just during the pirate ages. I'm talking about way back when there wasn't really food. When people weren't farming and you had to go and look for food.
Yes.
All you could find was like wild fruits. Like this is a wild banana. It's a very thick skin, lots of seeds, and it's dry and bitter.
Yes. Bananas that we eat now are nothing like how they were originally. That is true.
Well, you can still find these wild bananas.
Yes, you can, especially in Central Africa.
Well, today they look like these. These are what they sell. But I was searching to find out how to domesticate a wild banana, and well, found out that you shouldn't actually. You don't grow them by seed.
No,
If you look at most bananas, if you do find any seed, they're extremely small. But
Yes.
people don't grow the bananas from seed. They actually clone it. So they grab a piece of the banana tree and grow it from there.
Well, what you do, so once you've had your banana crop, okay, you then must cut down all the banana trees, but you leave the roots in. And from those roots will grow an entire new tree that will then have more fruit. And after you've harvested the fruit, you cut the tree down again.
Well, okay, I should have showed you the other page here.
It's quite weird.
So I saw them doing it with a couple of trees before. They take a piece of branch and then they remove some of the bark, and then they put sand around it, and then the roots started coming out of it, and then they cut it off, and then they plant it, and then you grow another tree.
That's if you're making more and more trees, but even the original tree, to keep it working, you must cut it down.
Yeah, no, but you want that original tree. You want the same bananas. You don't want different bananas. It's creating beautiful bananas, so you want to duplicate that tree.
Yes. So you can both, so when you cut the original down, you can take part of what you've cut down to grow a new tree.
Yeah, as long as it grows roots, you can just plant it and let it grow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have to carefully plastic bag the bananas, partly because if you don't, birds and monkeys will chow out the lot and ruin them. So you will often see banana plantations and all the bananas are covered in plastic bags.
But so people didn't really eat bananas a few thousand years ago?
Oh,
I'm
they
guessing.
did. Okay, so the best information about bananas I got from some Ugandan friends. Now, just as in some places potatoes are your staple starch, and in some places mealies are your staple starch, and in some places wheat, in Uganda it's bananas. But you get 43 different varieties of banana, ranging from teeny tiny little ones about an inch long, which are really, really sweet, all the way to quite large ones that are about a foot to a foot and a half long. But they're not sweet at all, they're savoury, they're starchy. And you cook them the way that you would cook putupap. So you get all these different varieties that are used in different ways. So yeah, what we would probably refer to a number of them as plantain, because they're not what we think of as bananas, but they're a kind of banana. And they're used in different ways and in different situations for
But
savoury.
they are all domesticated. They're not wild banana trees. They're
Nowadays,
used for commercial use.
nowadays they are. Well, I don't know if I'd go as far as say commercial, because a great deal of the banana production to make things like matoke is done by the local people in their backyard. It's not great. It's not really the kind of thing you buy much, because you
Okay.
can't dry it really. You want it fresh. So they will grow their own more than anything to make matoke.
Okay. So some people don't buy it, or
Yeah.
especially if you're a garden farmer.
Well, it's sort of a joke. If you're Ugandan, I can say that you're poor without saying you're poor by saying that you eat a lot of fish and matoke. So I don't know what the Ugandan word is now, it's gone out my head, but in Bemba it's kapenta. They're a little fish that you catch the tiny little fish and you dry them. In this country, you would give it to your cat as a treat, but in many African countries, it's a staple food. And if you're not very rich, they're very, very cheap. So if you, because matoke you grow in the garden, so if you eat a lot of matoke and kapenta, we're basically saying you're poor, because your staple food is the cheap shit, as opposed to real red meat.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cheap and easy, if you will.
Well, I'm so glad that I live in these ages where food is quite abundant. I don't have to starve and scavenge and look for a little rat to kill so I can eat something for
Well,
today.
not just that. Before we got a lot of transfer across, potatoes were not available at all. They were given first to the Irish by the Apache. No, not the Apache, the Navajo, sorry, as a gift to help them when there was a famine in Ireland. And there's still a statue of a Navajo in Dublin commemorating the friendship between the Irish and the Navajo. So if you lived in England, say, back in the day, before you had ship travel, okay, no potatoes, no tomatoes, no celery, no cabbage, no lettuce, no turnips, no goat meat, no sheep meat, very, very little cow meat, and it would have been aurochs, not normal cow, no horse meat. You just didn't really get in England at all. No guavas, no oranges, no lemons. The only apples you got would have been crab apples, which are very sour. Your main vegetable source would be things like dandelion, marshmallow, stuff like that. Certain things like, what's that other one? I forget it now. It's a particularly bitter type of green. I don't like it at all. Watercress. You could have watercress. And anyway, if you're poor, virtually no meat anyway. Rabbits, there were some, but mostly hares, not rabbits, which are quite stringy, I'm told. Fish, yes, if you're near a river or the ocean. Deer, yes, that you would have. Venison. But for most of the place, the venison was owned by the king, and if you were caught hunting it, they would cut your fingers off so you couldn't draw a bow again. You weren't allowed. So you couldn't have it even if it was there. Yeah, the sheer amount of food that you eat it just wasn't there and available. No pumpkins at all. I don't know, what other food do you eat commonly? No mealies. Mealies don't come from there. So no sweet corn. Not much by way of flour, because it was very hard to grow until it was commercialized and grown well into having a lot of seeds on the head. Your bread was generally made from acorns.
Have you ever seen Vikings?
Yes.
Yeah, but I was just thinking about pirates and Vikings. They need to eat, otherwise they'll die.
Yeah.
And if you look at Vikings, they're on the sea for a few weeks. Okay, for us it's just a few minutes, but for them, obviously it's a few weeks, and then they stop. They raid the place. They jump on the ships and they go. But shouldn't they first stop, gather food, resupply?
Well, first of all, when they stopped and raid the places, your mistake is thinking that they were only going for gold. They weren't. They were going for your food as well. Secondly, many of the places that they raided, they didn't pull the boat up in front of the place and run in. They would hide the boat somewhere far off. They would be a couple of weeks to months on land, running up and down, raiding different places, then go back to the ship and sail away. It wasn't hit and run stuff at all.
Yeah.
And one of the first things they would do on arrival was gather food.
Yeah. Yeah, that's worth more than gold.
Absolutely. Without it, your gold ain't going home.
So I'm looking
yeah.
at a list of what they did eat. Sorry about
All good.
it's itching.
So they would eat.
So one was ship biscuits.
Yes. Ship biscuits have been a staple all over, and there are all kinds of variants. Now, from what I understand, the Vikings used to mix the biscuits with fruit, dried and ground up to make the biscuits to give it more value. We know that in the North Americas.
Not just that. Like I said, it's flour and water.
Yes.
And then it's soaked in sometimes coffee or rum.
Yes.
To make it edible. I'm
yes,
not sure.
Because it was, well, when it was baked unleavened for space and to make it very hard, so it lasted for a long time. But of course, by the time they got round to giving it you to eat, it was like a rock. So you had to soak it to make it edible, not flavor edible, but as in physically capable of getting it into you. They were freaking hard.
Okay. Yeah, pirates also ate salted pickled meats.
Yes. Dried meats don't do well if you're on an open boat on the sea. So it works better to pickle it, either in vinegar or in brine.
Okay. Well, it shows salt horse and salt pork.
Yes, salt pork was very popular. It pickles well.
And then, of course, dried fruit foods, which were beans, peas, maize, rice, and oatmeal.
Not maize. No maize.
Well, it says maize, yeah.
They're wrong, because maize comes from the Americas, and you don't get maize in Europe at all. Beans, yes. Peas,
Well, these are
absolutely.
pirates. I don't look for pirates for just in Europe alone. I'm sure you had Indian pirates and
Oh, you
all
did,
sorts of
but you were
pirates.
saying Vikings.
Yeah, no, but then I said pirates.
I
Pirates
know.
also ate.
Well, rice would come from the Chinese, so yes, the Chinese pirates would have eaten it, but
Yeah,
not the
because I did
Europeans.
search for pirates. The Vikings question that I brought up, that was only when they stopped. They only in the Vikings movie, they just stopped. They raided the place and left
Yeah, it's
immediately.
for short, the short version for the movie.
Yeah, and then I went on with the pirates. So in pirates food, yeah, it's the
Okay.
ship's biscuits, salted pickle meats, dried foods,
Don't forget
and fresh.
pemmican.
Eh?
In the Americas, they had a thing that the Indians there had invented called pemmican. And basically, it's kind of like making that hardtack ship's bread, but you add dried meat and other things in it, and then you make it with fat. And it basically makes a meat energy bar. And from what I understand, it tastes like shit, but it's really, really good, full of protein, which gives you a lot of energy.
So they did eat some fresh food.
Yes, when they could.
Sea turtles, fish, some land animals, and birds.
Yes, absolutely.
So they would definitely take some animals worth to slaughter them later on to keep the meat at least fresh because they're going to be on there for months.
That, not so much. Remember, the size of the boats is really small comparative. So a couple of birds in a cage, yes, but not really too many animals on board,
Well, I'm
no.
sure. I'm sure some of the things they did steal were probably animals.
Well, when you got an animal, you dry the meat immediately or pickle it, because of the and also if you've got a live animal, you have to feed it. That's the problem.
Okay, so land animals. It also says here when visiting islands, pirates
Yes,
hunted wild hogs, goats,
yes,
and seabirds.
yes, very
Okay,
much
so
so.
they don't really take animals with, but they did stop at islands to go and hunt quickly.
And knowing where those right islands are was a major thing if you were a pirate. Absolutely. And hence why we call them buccaneers, because of the rack that you dried the meat on, the bukan, because they hunted and dried the meat. And of
Okay, some of
course,
these fruits they probably can't take with because it shows here they also ate fruits, which were limes and lemons,
yes.
oranges,
Well,
when in port.
when in
So,
port, but in the Caribbean, they would have gone for things like guavas and mangoes. And that was where the real imperative came, was sooner or later you have to come to shore or you die of scurvy. You have no choice, because it has to be fresh fruit and vegetables to give you vitamin C. You can't take dried fruit and vegetables to get vitamin C. And there was the huge thing. You've got to come to shore. And if you make sure that the pirates can't come to shore, right there, you've got a problem. because sooner or later you're too weak to do anything and they can easily catch you. So having a secret island where there are fruits and vegetables and wild pigs is a really big deal. And that's why they made a very big deal about recapturing Tortuga, because Tortuga supported the pirates, which meant the pirates now had a safe place to go and get all of the things they needed. They could sell their stuff, the whole lot, which meant they could stay strong.
This sounds a bit disgusting, but while rare, so it is rare, but cannibalism was not completely unknown in extreme scenarios of starvation.
Correct. So one of the tactics was that they would force them out to sea again, waiting for you to basically starve to death. They won't let you come to land, and they patrol the coasts. So if you didn't have an island where you could restock, you were pretty much stuffed. And yes, hey, if there's no other food, we take a vote and, well, sorry, Spooky, you lost your dinner. Now, the problem with that is you may not realize it, but there is a certain strange enzyme in human flesh that if you eat it, it will cause you to go completely insane. It does something to your brain. Eating human flesh is extremely bad for you. We are essentially poisonous to ourselves.
Yeah.
So those people that went ahead and did so went nuts.
So I typed in 2 words, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Salmagundi.
Salmagundi. Okay, and Bukan. The Bukan is the rack that you dry the meat on. So they were called buccaneers as a corruption of buccaneers, those who dried meat.
Buccaneers.
Yes.
Yeah. A method of smoking meat, usually beef or pork, on a wooden crate over a fire, which
Correct.
gave buccaneers their name.
Yes. And then as it translated into English, it became buccaneers. But originally it was from the French, buccaneers.
And salmagundi, it's a stew.
Yes.
From roasted
Basically,
meat, fish, pickled vegetables, eggs, and spices,
well,
often dressed with oil and vinegar. These are iconic dishes and methods.
okay, so here's a rule for you. Okay, and you may or may not know this. If anybody ever says to you, it's a traditional dish, what they mean is, when our people went through the worst famine ever, and the only thing we had to eat was this, we would make this. And if you ask around, you usually find the traditional dish is only given to tourists to see the expression on your face when you get around to eating it. So many of these traditional local specialties are the things you avoid. They're not the good shit, they're the bad stuff. Now, basically, the original South African potjie was our version of salmagundi, which is actually one of the more decent traditional dishes. So you would get whatever you could get and you threw it into the pot. And as you went, you kept cooking it over and over and adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. So the original potjie would have 6 or 7 kinds of meat in, dependent on what you're able to bring back from the hunt. and whatever vegetation you were able to get and cook up into a stew, because that's what you got. So you caught one pigeon, one cane rat, a very small deer, and I only let you have one leg of it because the rest of it went to the other guys, etc., etc., and you bunged all of it into a pot.
I just read something here, which pirates actually ate better than the Navy,
Yes.
because the Navy were the good guys, so they didn't raid people and get fresh food and nice food, nice things to eat like the pirates. They had to stick with their.
You were on military rations, so you got what you were
Yeah.
given. There was
Yeah.
no, oh, well, we've got wonderful loot from the person we've raided, so now we can have their wine and cheese and all the rest of it. No, no, no. Even if it was confiscated, it was put in the hold and taken away. You didn't get any of it. So that's exactly why when one of our guys, old Black Bob, turned to piracy, he was paid £4 a month as a wage and ate like shit, doing exactly the same level of risk as when he was a pirate. And when he was a pirate, his share of all the raidings was in thousands of pounds, and he ate like a king. And he's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm not going back, am I?
Yeah.
And that
You don't
was
have
why.
to be kind or anything. You do whatever you want to do.
And because of who he was, low born, he would never have risen up in the ranks to anything worthwhile, because he wasn't, from a decent family. Whereas as a pirate, he became the admiral of his own fleet.
Yeah. And the Navy probably don't also have good drinks. They probably just had water. Where I see the pirates, they had rum and grog, whatever that is, and
Okay.
beer, ale.
Grog is a mixture of rum with water, so it's watered down rum. Either it was watered down because you don't want people on board a dangerous ship like that drunk in a storm, so it was watered to thin it, or when it was rationed, it was watered down, so at least you got some alcohol, because the alcohol helped clean the water. So you didn't
Yes,
get
yeah,
sick.
that's what I'm reading here. So it says making water potable. So
Drinkable,
I think what they
basically.
mean by, well, potable, I
Won't
think
ma-
they
won't
want
ma-
to store the water.
No,
And if
potable.
you store water,
Potable means that it won't make you sick when you drink it.
okay.
So it's not about the taste. So I'm not saying it's necessarily drinkable in terms of taste nice, but it's drinkable in terms that it's safe to drink. That's what potable
Yeah.
means.
It's drinkable water. So
Safe,
that's why they
yes.
throw some.
Alcohol does that. And remember that most of the time they were in the Caribbean, where all the sugarcane fields were, so the cheapest alcohol was rum.
Yes.
So if you took on board a good couple of crates of rum, you could keep adding it to the water as you got clean water on, and it would keep the rum safe to drink, and it won't go moldy and yuck, and it will last you for quite a long time. So it's a very clever way of managing.
So can water also spoil? Because I'm reading here, beer, ale often preferred over water because it lasts longer without spoiling.
Yes, water does spoil. Have you never seen, like in a rain barrel outside, all of the hochos in and the
Yes.
algae growing?
Things starts growing in it.
Yes,
Like you
and,
get little bugs, little
and your swimming pool goes green.
mosquitoes.
It goes green from the algae that grows in the water, which makes it something that will make you quite sick.
Okay. Yeah, and beer doesn't grow algae.
No,
Or
because
you
of
don't
the
have
alcohol.
mosquitoes growing in it.
Because of the alcohol. So while they didn't
Right.
realize, beer and grog were absolutely preferred because you didn't get sick drinking it. And of course, you can imagine if you got raging diarrhea in everybody on a ship in a very tight, confined space. Yeah, not good, no.
So rum was inexpensive and plentiful in the
Yes,
Caribbean.
yes.
This was their favorite alcohol drink.
It was very cheap and it got you very drunk. So, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so it also says here that they did eat wild vegetables,
Yes,
such as celery, turnip greens, watercress, and tree cabbage
yes. Base,
to put into their stews.
I'm not 100% exactly certain what tree cabbage is, but all of those others are basic wild plants that you can find around. Celery in the Americas and the Caribbean, absolutely. It's basically, I think it's a kind of allium, if I'm not mistaken. So related to onions, I think. I could be wrong. Wild onions absolutely would have been very popular. Strong tasting, so masks the yuck of the food.
Okay, they brought up biscuits again, but here's dried beans. Have you ever ate dried beans before?
If you transport beans, they're all dried. You soak them and then boil them, and then they become soft beans. But when they're dried, they store for a long time and don't rot.
Maybe I'm not sure what beans are, because I know green beans.
Green beans are usually eaten fresh, but if you've ever gone to the shop and got sampan beans, no? Red beans, kidney
No,
beans, black beans.
baked beans, yes.
Baked beans are made from.
I eat them out of a tin. They
Yes.
are not dried.
No, but you can the actual bean that baked beans are made of, you can dry.
Okay. No, I've never ate any dried beans before.
Oh, okay. No,
Not
it's
that I
very,
can
very
remember.
nice. I must say, I love one of my favorite dishes, which is actually a South African thing, is sampan beans. And it's dried. You've got to soak it for overnight to rehydrate, and then when it's soaked, you wash all the water off, throw the water away, and then you boil them.
But isn't salted beef awesome? I mean, biltong, that's actually nice.
Absolutely. And I can tell you that dried beans, when rehydrated and boiled, if first what you do, you take some salt pork and fry it in the bottom to make the flavor all come out, all the fat, and then you add the beans and the water and boil it up into a stew. Now the beans makes the meat stretch a lot. So with a very little amount of meat, you can make a lot of flavor with the beans, and the beans are incredibly filling. So you don't need a lot of meat to make a really good filling stew that will feed quite a few people
Oh,
and still taste really good.
well, I love pork fat, and
Yeah.
it seems like I'm the only one. Nobody around me likes it.
Oh. Oh no, I
I
love it.
love chewing on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Crackling. The best crackling in the world is made by the Portuguese. I will tell you that right now. They know how to do it so well. If you ever get a chance to get Portuguese crackling, go right ahead. And funnily enough, the guys that make it best out of the Portuguese are the guys from Madeira or the guys from Porto. Really,
Okay.
really, really good. So, absolutely. But the Portuguese method isn't just the skin itself that's made crisp. They leave quite a bit of the fat and meat on as well and deep fry it. So you get the crispy outside and these wonderful fatty, chewy, meaty bits as well. Oh, it's incredible. They are real masters of cooking pigs.
So these chip biscuits, how long did they last?
Months.
I see here's an image of a guy hitting it with a hammer. Is it really that hard?
Yes. It really is that hard. The advised method was to keep your coffee and soak your biscuit in the coffee
Okay.
until it turned into a porridge, and then eat it like that. Because if you try and chew it, you'll break your teeth.
Okay, so that's why it was saying here it was often soaked in both coffee or rum to make it edible.
Yes. So we're not talking about flavor, we're talking about the ability to break it up and actually get it into yourself. It was
Yeah.
that hard. And of course, kept for months, it went harder and harder and harder. It was famously hard.
Yeah, hitting it with a hammer. The hammer probably breaks. So
Well,
first soak it in
I've
rum.
eaten a version of hardtack once when I was in the military. And yes, what I did is I threw it in my fire bucket and poured in some water and I boiled it till it turned into mushy porridge.
Okay. Can it last years?
I don't know if it lasts quite that long. But basically it's not much more than flour and water. And they would keep it long enough that it would even go stale and weevily. So, months at least. And if the Navy is anything like the Army...
Okay. No, well, you are wrong.
Oh?
Yeah. So it can actually last for decades.
Oh, good Lord. I would not
Yeah.
want to eat decades old hardtack. I got to be honest with you. That
It's got
sounds a
a
bit scary.
30-year shelf life.
Holy God. That sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
Here's your dinner. My great-great-great-grandmother made it. Enjoy. Fantastic. No. I have to say that the invention of canning made a major difference to the kind of food you can get while on a boat.
But you have to keep it safe, away from moisture, because moisture will then make it
Yes,
go right.
of course.
Yeah.
And what
So
you
it's
do,
already dried, so just keep it dry and it's safe.
well, you would wrap it in greased paper, often which then would be dipped in wax to keep the moisture out.
Well, I saw a video the other day. Somebody had a McDonald's burger, which he unwrapped for the first time after 40 years. And the only thing that derailed it was the little pickle.
Lettuce. Yeah. I've heard stories about that, and I didn't believe it until I actually found a video by a guy that was actually complaining about this and did it to prove it with a burger, and actually showed how it just doesn't change. And yeah, no, it's really true, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what's inside. He said he figured out, the guy that actually wrote a book about it when he was in college as a joke. They grabbed a burger and stuck it in a friend's locker before going on a 3-month holiday. And then when they got back, they were all standing around waiting for him to open his locker, and this rotten smell would come out, and it would be hilarious. And he opened his locker, reached in and said, "How did this get in here?" And the burger was fine. And they're like, "Dude, that's 3 months old." And that's when you realize. So yeah, apparently it's true.
Yeah.
Not
No,
a
the
good
little
thing.
pickle was completely gone.
Well,
It
it's the
left some
only real
stain on the
thing.
bun, but that's it.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah,
the
the
only
burger
real
was
thing,
still
isn't
fine.
it? So all of the rest of your bun is essentially a kind of plastic, I suppose.
Yeah, it's fake. Even the meat.
Yep, the meat, the cheese, the lot.
Yeah.
God, that's frightening. But yes, we do know that I don't think it was invented for that. Thank you for the rose, Karina.
So if you go and buy a new burger, I wonder how old that burger actually is.
That was the question I was wondering.
Yeah, they probably made that burger last year. They're only serving it to you now.
I do know that the Australians always include Vegemite in their military rations because it's so packed with proteins and energy and salts to combat dehydration and stuff, that it works as a major survival food. And we've got Bovril does the same thing. You know, Karina, I can't believe you've been here the whole time because you're supposed to be at work, which means you've been lurking in the background and not letting the rest of the office know that you're on TikTok. You bad person. But I'm glad you were here the whole time, and you're very, very welcome to be here the whole time.
Oh, is she from Canada?
Yes, so when we hit midnight, it's 4 o'clock for her.
Really? It's not 6 a.m.?
No, it's 4 o'clock in the
Nice.
afternoon.
I mean, 6 p.m.
Apparently not. I
It
suppose
depends on
Canada's
where
big.
in Canada,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Because
yeah.
I do have some friends in Canada.
So it would depend which bit. I know that you
Yeah.
can cross time zones for Canada and Russia.
Okay. Even the United States, they run on different times. Like one side of America,
East
on the
and
other
West
side of
Coast.
America.
Yeah.
Where in South Africa, we've only got one standard time.
We standardized the whole of South Africa, though we do straddle more than one time zone.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here's the thing. In tomorrow's live, we will get into some of the really cool pirates, including Edward Teach, who is one of my absolute favorite pirates ever, for all kinds of reasons. We will also get into people like Anne Bonny and Mary Read because they are intimately tied in with Edward Teach. And it's pretty damn cool. So, that's where we will go tomorrow with more pirates and, of course, the Legends of Treasure. And, most importantly, we are going to end in what is a doubloon?
Dublin.
So, the gold coins that pirates went for were called doubloons. Now, why a doubloon? Well, it comes from the Spanish word doblon, meaning double. So it was a large gold coin that was worth twice the value of a standard Spanish gold pistole or escudo. So it was a very important gold coin because it was worth a hell of a lot more, and it was quite significant as Spain used that as the currency in Spain and in the colonies from the 16th to the 19th centuries. And it was the main way of transporting their gold around. So, because it was worth literally 4 Spanish dollars. So, incredibly valuable coin. And when they transported money by ship, they generally did it using doubloons. So that was what the pirates wanted, big gold coins.
Okay, they do look different.
Yes, they were specially made, and they were considered to be valuable common booty, which is pretty cool.
They've got different patterns on them. Okay,
Yes.
but the one is in the 1700s, the other one's in the 1600s.
So an escudo would have been about half the size of that.
This one looks like it was hit with a hammer, and this one looks like it was melted into place.
Well, this is why coins have milling on them. Because if you were clever, you would very carefully shave the outer edge of your coins, making them slightly but not noticeably smaller. And then you would gather all the shavings and melt them into new coins, thus increasing your wealth. So people put milling on the edges of coins to stop you clipping them.
Are they still valuable today?
Oh, hell yes. If you find a doubloon, it's made of solid gold.
I want to find a chest, a hidden chest full of them.
Well, there are quite a few of them around, apparently, that have never been found, including the treasure of Edward Teach, as we shall discover in the next live. So there.
Try and find a treasure map.
Well, he didn't leave a map, the bugger. And the only people who knew where he hid it was Anne Bonny and Mary Read. And therein lies the problem. But that's for tomorrow's discussion. We will get to it all and talk, because his treasure would have included doubloons because it was raided from the Spanish.
Okay.
Yes. So there you go. So with that said, till the next time, thank you so much for being with us. Do write down your questions, Spooky. And Karina, if you come up with any questions or things, do ask them. Write them down too so you don't forget. I'd love to hear more. And thank you to everybody that has been on and joined in. It's been a fantastic live, and I think the next one will be just as good. So, good night. Sleep deep.
Have a good one. Cheers.
Sleep sweet, and avoid pirates. Have a good one.